Okay, thank you very much. So the first thing is to put a Mancunian in front of a microphone to talk about Manchester is a very, very dangerous thing, I guess. But I'll avoid talking about Manchester. I'm going to let Paul do that in a minute because we're working very closely with Siemens. So what I'm going to talk about is Manchester's approach to smart cities. It's not necessarily the right way, but it's the way we're doing it in Manchester. I'm going to start off with a quote by this guy, Cedric Price. Cedric Price was an architect, esteemed architect. And he was someone who recognised very, very early on in the architecture world that technology was going to be critical in the future. And he came out with this quote in the 1960s, I think. But it really does ask a big question. We're driving in smart cities around technology. And quite often we forget why we're doing that. And he really raised this question. So what was the purpose of all this technology? Why were we embracing it, and what for? Well, cities globally are facing a number of challenges, but the key ones I think I'll try to crystallise in a few slides. And we all face this in big cities. Growing population growth globally, causing massive urbanisation of our cities. How do we cope with that growing population, and what does it mean to the services that we provide as cities? And I don't just mean municipal authorities, I mean our partners as well. And how do we meet the expectations of citizens? Press the green button. Climate change. Infrastructure, critical one. Most of our infrastructure, certainly in the UK in our big cities, were built in the Victorian area. Great, really good stuff. However, we now face the challenge that has really come to the end of its lifetime. How do we, in a city that already exists, how do we retrofit the infrastructure for a city? And finally, we're dealing, of course, and coming from a local authority, I have to do like a little whinge about finance, I guess. But we are dealing with real constraints in terms of public sector finance, and the adage, of course, being how do we do more with less? And of course, when this guy was Chancellor of Exchequer, there was a little bit more money knocking around. There isn't now. So what I really want to do now very quickly is flick through a range of different cities and their approaches to smart cities and where their particular strengths and assets lie. Because all cities, I guess, approach this in a slightly different way. So New York is quite interesting in a way because they're really putting their flag around the economic development piece around smart cities. The Made in New York initiative, where you get manufacturer close to user. Really, really strong emphasis there from New York. Chicago's very big on this open data piece. These are sensors that you see around lampposts and other fittings in Chicago, picking up data, used for analysis, predictive analysis, to be able to inform the city authorities and react in a more proactive way. Amsterdam, often heralded in European terms as up in the top league of smart cities, very strong in terms of their engagement with their SME community and their academic organisations. And it's something that we're seeking to emulate, I guess, in Manchester. Helsinki, on the back, of course, of Nokia, have developed some really good and interesting stuff around public sector reform. Those of you who are in the local government world will understand that public sector reform is a really big issue at the minute, and how, again, do we do more with less, but in a smarter way, and some interesting stuff coming out of Helsinki, not least from their innovation agency, Forum Virium. And Barcelona, who I guess they badge themselves as the world's smart city, as the Catalonians often do. Manchester City are playing Barcelona later on. But they have played really strong emphasis on sensor networks. And there's an interesting issue here around sensors. So they put sensors in a lot of their municipal bins. Two reasons for that. One is Barcelona, as you know, relies heavily on a tourist industry, but also have a big part of that is part of a big restaurant trade. It's a hot climate. What do you get when you get heat and waste food? You get noxious smells. That has an impact on tourism. So they've got these sensors in a lot of their bins that says when the bin is full, and then the refuse vehicle comes around and collects when it's full, as opposed to what we do predominantly in the UK, where you put your blue bin out on a Wednesday, every Wednesday, whether it's full or not. So it's much more smart way of doing things. And then I suppose there's Rio, isn't there? The big stuff, the IBM big model of people behind banks of screens in white jackets, monitoring where traffic is going, etc., etc. Yes, that's probably right for Rio. Mayor Pires has got just had a World Cup. He's got an Olympics coming up. He needs to manage that city in an efficient way. So it probably works for Rio. Wouldn't work for Manchester. And we come to this place. This is China, of course. And China's developing 100 smart cities. And I want to give you a little flavour of this because we're doing a lot of work with China at the minute for two reasons. I might seem odd that we're sort of expanding our empire. But we're doing it for two reasons. One is we're working with a number of Chinese cities and their state governments in terms of developing synergies around policies that will enable smart cities to develop. And the second reason is introducing UK SMEs into the Chinese market. And I'm going to give you a flavour of some of their smart cities. And these are master planning and built-up design pieces done by a UK architecture firm, BDP. So this is an R&D centre around smart cities in Nanjing. This is a city we're twinned with Wuhan. This is a whole new central business district in the centre of Wuhan, which we're working on with them in terms of ensuring some of our SMEs get part of the opportunity here in terms of solutions. Here's another one, Qingdao, big CBD master plan. Suzhou. This is a cluster of smart city technologies. Look at the size of that as a smart city cluster. And a similar eco-science park. Another science park. These go on and on and on. And that's just a slice. Now, what I want to do now is just a quick flick of the film. And those of you who know of Jane Jacobs, who talked a lot around cities, talked about the ballet of the street. And this is Sydney in the 1920s. And apologies for showing pictures of trams in Edinburgh. But there's a reason actually for this. Because what we did after this, and Sydney did as well, is, you know, in Manchester, we got rid of our trams and we segregated our highways. We had pedestrians on pavements, we didn't even bother with cyclists, and then the road for cars. What we've starting to create in Manchester now is much more this piece, where we have the flow, the dynamic of the city, of the street, where people are moving across the street with the flow of the transport, and everything is melded into this huge mix. So it's quite an interesting way of how cities are evolving and changing. They're not in silos. That's the kind of point of this slide. We're not talking about silos anymore. And you might say it's chaos, but it's organised chaos. People going about doing their stuff. Let's come back to Manchester. So I'll give a flavour, really, of our approach around smart cities very briefly. And I was just saying around Tony Wilson. And I'm not. What this quote's really saying is the way we've done things is our way. It's not necessarily the right way, but what we're not going to do is a cut and paste job on a smart city. And I think that's really, really important, because if you want to connect with your communities, your citizens, it has to have resonance with their priorities and their issues. So we've identified, I guess, 6 blocks, and they are around live, work, play, move, learn and organise. And I'll just pick up some of the things there. So living is, where do we start to build our houses, recognising intergenerational issues. Work, what's going to be the sort of industries of the future, and how do we provide for those industries in terms of our skills base? Absolutely critical in Manchester. How do we provide the right skills? How do we attract talent? How do we retain that talent? Absolutely vital for us. Play is very important for people in the city. What's going to make people want to come to a place and enjoy it? For us, it's very important, obviously from a sport perspective, and culturally too, play a very big role in our Smart Cities plan. Movement, of course, very critical in terms of not just within the city, but its interconnectivity to the outside world in terms of the globalisation agenda. Learning, and there's a block here really around the whole learning of the city, not just our universities, not just our schools, not just our formal education, but the university. How do we self-learn? How do we learn from the mistakes we've made so we may do things better in the future? And the last block really is around organisation and around the devolved powers that Manchester has been able to get recently. And that's going to be really important for us going forward in the future, being able for us to set our own budgets against our own specific priorities. Those are all critical building blocks for the smart city for us. And we built that really around 30 projects, and the yellow blocks there are distinct areas. Some of those of you know Manchester will know them, and Paul's going to talk around the project in the Manchester corridor, so I won't talk about that. But we have Airport City, the 3rd largest airport in the UK, which the City Council have an ownership of, but a real opportunity to do some smart city development there. Ancoats, those of you who know Manchester, is a World Heritage Site, big mills, awful lot of new flats development going in there, new increases in inner city living. And Collyhurst. Collyhurst, those of you who know it, pretty much always comes top or thereabouts of the deprivation indices, whatever the deprivation indices is. And we want to do something there because those are the communities that really, really matter for us if we're going to address some of the deprivation issues that we face acutely in our city. And the lilac piece in the middle are around our 30 projects. So we've got projects in new city service, data-driven, intramated city, our sensor infrastructure, critically getting down to our neighbourhood platforms, and a piece really there around fabrication, digital economy, 3D printing. What are we going to do about that, and how do we bring that into the city? And the bottom piece really is around an innovation agency. How are we going to deliver some of these projects? Because they're not all the city's ones. We need to work with Siemens, we need to work with our universities, we need to work with our SMEs. So this is one of the quick projects. This is the Greater Manchester Data Synchronisation Project, funded through the Digital Catapult, run by one of our SMEs, Future Everything. And this is looking at 5 different sets of data released by all 10 authorities that make up Greater Manchester, which presents scale of data. It's put out in open source format so people can access that data and develop applications on the back of it. This is a festival we have, again, Future Everything run this, but it's actually just kicking off today. It runs every year, it's run for 20 years, and this is about real cutting edge new stuff. And it's not necessarily, it could be music, it's about the future of the city, the future of cities. So that's quite an innovative piece that's going on in the city, really promoting some of the activity that's going on. Slide about data. We're doing 2 big projects with our Transport Authority, Transport Greater Manchester, around data collection. One is around collecting data on incidences around our transport network, so we're able to relay that information to users of the public transport system and drivers to enable them to react immediately to be able to plan the most effective route for them at a particular time. So if an incident happens on, for example, the M62, they can respond accordingly. That's the bottom piece there is the 3D model of the corridor. We're quite into this, quite into 3D modelling of the city, primarily because it's a really good way of visually engaging with people. And I won't talk about this because this is the corridor, and Paul will be talking about our big lighthouse project, which Paul will talk about. I want to end really with this slide actually, and this goes back to Cedric Price really, and he saw the city as an egg. So if you imagine the ancient cities as a boiled egg, everything very, very compartmentalised, and the interaction with the outside world was minimal. Moving on, I can talk about a fried egg, so things became a little bit more fluid, little bit more flow between the inner core and the other areas. But where we're in now is this notion anyway of a scrambled egg, where everything really is mixed up. And it goes back to that slide of the Sydney trams really. The flow of people, the flow of infrastructure is all overlaying a matrix. The cities have developed layers and layers and layers. Really very, very different, I guess, from some of the Chinese cities that you see, new build cities that are going in place, which is everything at one point. I'm going to hand over to Paul.